Hi. Would you like me to start playing the video now? You're frozen on my end.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
You unfroze.
Are we good? Okay. No, I was saying you can start if you're ready. Yeah, I'm good to go.
Okay, sounds good. I will share my screen. You see it?
Yep, I can see it.
Connectra creates opportunities for people living with disabilities by providing information, resources, and programming geared towards greater inclusion and quality of life. Check out some of the programs we offer through our online learning platform, Connect Together, including our Service Mondays, where we highlight a local organization or initiative, Wednesday Chair Yoga with Bobby Seal-Kobiski, Thursday Adapted Fitness with Megan Williamson, Friday Rotating Dance Classes hosted by Janice Lawrence and Joanne Cuff, and other initiatives including presentations by the Disabled Independent Gardeners Association's Growable program and our Perspective series.
Also coming up on July 22nd, we have an accessible community forum on accessible housing in British Columbia.
Check out our updated programs calendar on our website, connectra.org, or find us on Facebook at Connectra Society. Connectra.
Okay, I'll hide over to you.
Okay, perfect. Let me just screen share that, and oh no, I need to move that. Can you guys see my notes or no? No. Okay, great.
No, not your
That
notes. You can see
works.
your screen.
Perfect. Awesome. So I'm glad that worked. Hi, everyone. Happy Friday afternoon. I hope you guys had a great week. I just want to say thank you for joining me and tuning into the workshop. I first want to begin by acknowledging with gratitude and respect that I'm joining today from the traditional and ancestral lands of the Coquitlam First Nations. And additionally, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which I learn and work is the unceded traditional territory of the Katzie, Semiahmoo, Kwantlen, and other Coast Salish people. I would like to encourage everyone to take a moment before we begin and reflect on where they're joining from. Okay, great, we can get started here now. So my name is Angelina Sharma. I'm a community animator in Surrey for Can You Dig It and Farm to School BC programs as part of the Public Health Association of BC. So my role as an animator is to strengthen community food systems in Surrey by working with schools and community gardens. At the moment, I currently coordinate 2 community gardens in the City of Surrey. And last month, Can You Dig It successfully built our first community garden in South Surrey, which I also coordinate and manage. Aaron Topley, the provincial manager of Can You Dig It, is also joining us today. A little wave. So let's get right into it. So just some history about our program. Can You Dig It was founded in 2009 by Possibilities, which is a nonprofit organization that created a program to foster new opportunities for individuals with development disabilities. In 2019, Possibilities actually turned the program over to the Public Health Association of BC, also known as PHA BC, to scale the program province-wide. So Can You Dig It, again, is a program administered by the Public Health Association of BC, and it supports communities across BC to create inclusive and welcome food growing gardens where individuals from all backgrounds of life and life experiences can learn, share, grow, and contribute to the betterment of their community. So our vision is that all people have equal access to inclusive community growing spaces, and that's leading to stronger, vibrant communities and a secure food supply for everyone. You can see on the screen, our 4 core pillars are community connectedness, collective resilience, equity and social justice, and food security. And we have a lot of projects, but some of them include the Community Garden Accessible Toolkit, which I will talk about later, the City of Surrey Community Garden Policy, which I'll also highlight, and school farm grants. So I will get a little bit more in depth with the accessibility toolkit and the City of Surrey garden policy and audit in more detail throughout the presentation. Okay, so City of Surrey and Can You Dig It? So in October 2019, the City of Surrey actually reached out to the Public Health Association of BC, and they wanted to find support for their community gardens. So in October of that year, that is when the City of Surrey and Can You Dig It officially started their partnership. So during the partnership, there were some notable projects, and on the screen here, we have the audit, which is they conducted an audit of the environment of community gardens by speaking to the gardeners and the garden coordinators. They also created the results from this audit, helped them create the City of Surrey Community Garden Handbook, and that is for community gardens to use, helping them to standardize governance structures and increase community support. And from that audit, we also stepped in to help support 2 of the gardens in Surrey, and these gardens were struggling with governance and, struggling with governance and community support. And so I will dive a little bit deeper into all 3 of these projects in the next few slides. Okay, so this is the Community Garden Policy and Practice Audit. This audit was done to explore the socioeconomic demographics of the garden, the participation levels, the value of the garden in members' lives and community, and ways that they could improve the garden. So one of the key findings within the audit was the disparity in the gardens located in both the high-income neighborhoods versus the low-income neighborhoods. in the high-income neighborhoods, gardens had stronger governance structures, more space, better infrastructure, and higher member capacity. So with having the higher member capacity, it actually allowed them to contribute to the garden more, which includes like planning work parties or socials, hosting workshops, and applying for grant funding for the garden themselves. Additionally, among the gardens, there was a lack of diversity among garden coordinators. So garden coordinators were predominantly white, middle-aged women that are retired. That was what we found across the majority of the gardens. The audit also showed that the City of Surrey staff had limited time and resources to commit to the gardens. Municipalities often have some limitations on how much they can support. These gardens are usually one of the many projects that they juggle and are typically on the side of their desk. So while they're supporting them, they don't have the time to dedicate to them as much as it needs. And the gardens are usually spread apart in different departments depending on the municipalities. So sometimes they'll be in the Parks and Recreation Department, but then sometimes they're in horticulture. So typically these departments haven't had any proper training in garden management and conflict resolution. So they're not aware of how to properly deal with the situations that might arise in the garden. And lastly, there's no dedicated funding at a provincial level to help support the municipalities that implement the gardens. So often that's when nonprofits or external organizations such as ourselves can build partnerships with the municipalities to help support these gardens. And then we have here on the side a survey which shows the results from the audit. And the question was, why did you join a community garden? And so you can see here the results are prominently access to fresh foods and the enjoyment of gardening and the social connections and community. So this is a response of 107 gardeners and 5 garden coordinators out of the 9 gardens in the City of Surrey. Okay, so next up is the City of Surrey Community Garden Handbook. So one of the recommendations for the disparities from the high income and low income neighborhoods, the gardens in those areas, was to develop a standardized handbook for the gardens to adapt and adopt. So when creating this handbook, both the City of Surrey and Can You Dig It had an equity lens to ensure that all the community gardens in the City of Surrey are equitable, but also acknowledging and reflecting who will benefit from this handbook and whether there be challenges, and recognizing that not all gardens can thrive in the exact same way. So this handbook is intended to provide community gardens with operating or with the tools to help them operate independently. So within the garden handbook, there's garden guidelines that have governance structure and conflict resolution, as well as some steps that they can take for that. And this handbook or the tools are meant for garden communities, gardeners, and volunteers to use and adapt. So again, we recognize that not everyone's garden operation structure is the exact same, and that it needs to be respective of the community and the gardeners. So this more so provides suggestions for the structure of the community garden based on the neighborhood needs, and a government's document that can be easily adapted. So they can take parts from it that work for them, but this allows them to properly structure or to have a handbook with the structure for it. And any gardens that are struggling with governance can use this to build their community and their garden members. And so one additional recommendation from the audit showed that there were 2 gardens in the City of Surrey that were struggling, again, with governance structure and community support. And those 2 gardens were Holly Park and Queen Elizabeth Meadows. So those are the 2 gardens that I currently coordinate, and I'll be talking about them a little bit more. Oops. There we go. Okay, so this is Queen Elizabeth Meadows Garden. So these 2 pictures here are from after our work party, the very first one after our AGM. So we had all the gardeners together and we cleaned up the garden. We had some big tasks that needed to be done. And as you can see, the ground is bark mulch. And previous years, or the seasons, I guess, the rain had completely soaked the ground to the point where it was just puddles of dirt, and you can walk in it. It was really hard to like bend over and garden. And so the city had helped us get bark mulch for the ground, and that was our huge task prior to the season, the gardening season starting up, is laying all that down. So in this photo, it's quite fresh and nice and new. So these were the two. This is one of the gardens that was revealed to be struggling. So I've been coordinating Queen Elizabeth Meadows since March of this year. And while I've coordinated it, there are some things that we've noticed in the space, the physical space, that are some challenges to accessibility. So I also will talk about the accessibility toolkit, but when we were looking at the challenges, we referred to that toolkit to help identify some of these. So the pathways is the first one. So as I mentioned, we laid down new bark mulch. However, mulch pathways are really difficult for seniors or people with disabilities, or anyone that requires assisted devices, any walkers, wheelchairs, or scooters. It's not flat, it's very uneven, and they're, again, easily affected by the weather, and they do require maintenance. So when areas start to fill up with water and they become little pockets, we have to put more bark mulch on top. And so it's a constant maintenance of the pathways. And next up are the raised beds. So you can see in this bottom photo, the bottom left photo, that is the majority of the garden. So we only have 4 raised beds out of the 30 garden beds. So the beds in the top right photo, you can see, are a little bit higher. These beds are reserved for seniors or anyone with limited mobility, but there are quite a small amount out of the 30 garden beds. We only have 4 of them. So if we have more people that need the raised garden beds than we actually have, it becomes difficult to assign. And as you can tell, these lower beds are really low to the ground. You are almost always getting on your hands and knees to garden, or you're bending over, which, again, any back issues or hips or knees, it's very difficult. And often we found that gardeners will bring little pads for their knees to put down when they're tending to their garden. So another thing is that Queen Elizabeth is not in a very central spot for a garden. There is no designated parking for the garden itself. You have to park. Typically people park on the side of the street, which is slanted, uneven. So anybody, again, that would need assistive devices couldn't put it on there because it's not flat. There are no buses or transit lines near the park that stop right near it, and is often not in walking distance to a lot of our garden members. We find that a lot of them do drive to the area. There's a few that are able to walk, but the majority of the area is houses. And so these garden members typically live in townhouses or apartment buildings, complexes that don't have backyards. So they're coming quite a far distance to QE, which makes that also hard because typically you want garden members to be active in the garden, and it can be hard for people to come out for work parties or socials if it's a trek out there for them. And another big thing is our shed. So we have, there was graciously given by the City of Surrey, was a container shed. And while the container shed it's great in space and it was really needed, the lock on the shed is difficult for our garden members, and it requires them to almost get on their knees and turn the lock upside down and twist their head. And it can be very frustrating when you want to come in and grab tools and it takes you 5 minutes to open the shed. So that is something that we've heard a lot of garden members struggle with and would like to be changed, which we are working on. But it was quite a barrier for a lot of people, especially new garden members that hadn't figured out the right way to open it. Okay, so next up is the accessibility toolkit. So this toolkit is, I had mentioned earlier, but in this year, Can You Dig It and the City of Victoria released the Community Garden Accessibility Toolkit. So this was done by Erin and partners in the City of Victoria. And this toolkit provides the steps for new or existing gardens to create or transition gardens with the universal design principles in mind. So this toolkit was actually a huge help to guide us in the way that, guide us in the way that we built the South Surrey Community Garden, which I will talk about. We took aspects of the toolkit into consideration when making areas like designing the plots and looking at the pathways and the entrances, even transportation, parking, having a central area. So this toolkit is quite big and there's a lot to go through in it. So you can check out the toolkit here. There's a link for it. I don't know if I can copy and paste it, but
I put it in the chat.
Oh, did you? Thank you. So this is the link here will take you to the Can You Dig It website, and the toolkit will be there for you. And Erin is also doing a session about this toolkit on August 26th with Connectra. So if you want to learn about the toolkit more in depth and go through it, you can join that. Yeah. And then that's the picture here is the front of the toolkit, and you can see both the City of Victoria, the Public Health Association, and Can You Dig It? Okay, so this is our South Surrey Community Garden. So this is the garden our first garden that we have built. This was built on June 4th. So this was an empty parking lot in the White Rock Volkswagen in South Surrey. So you can see there's nothing there. There's just empty space. The Volkswagen had additional space, not enough cars, and we had partnered with them, and Erin had built a relationship with them to help build this community garden for the area of South Surrey. So this was done in under 6 hours, which surprised us because we thought it would take almost 2 days, but we had the help of about 50 volunteers, and those were volunteers from organizations, and they were also garden members that have been signed on to the garden. So within the 6 hours and the 50 volunteers, we were able to build these raised bed community garden boxes. And as you can see here in this photo, all of these boxes sit on pallets, so they're easily movable. So we kept that in mind, as well as they are raised off the ground to help, just to help with as I mentioned, QE, you're bending over, they're quite low to the ground. So we wanted to make sure to make this more accessible in the plots that we have. And this was also done in partnership with the White Rock Volkswagen, as well as Urban Systems Foundation, which had helped us, which had supplied the money for this build, and as well as a large portion of their volunteers, which really helped us put it together, because between the engineers and the architects, it was a huge help to build boxes and to cut wood and all of that stuff. So we're really grateful that we had that support, and it was great to see everyone come together, as well as the community come together, and the garden members got to see the garden from the ground up and see what they were going to be using for the season. So this is actually, this garden actually has 24 families signed on to it, and you can have between 1 to 4 plots, and as you can see, they're in little twos right here. So people often as a family may have 4 plots and have their grandkids come in and help water, and everyone is just really excited to have a garden in their neighborhood. So there's also a news article about this garden. So it talks about the process in our build and what the community garden does and how it contributes to the community. and some quotes from fellow members as well who are excited about having it. Let's go back here. Okay, so this is some of the successes we had when building this garden in accessibility. So as I mentioned, we use a toolkit to build the garden to make this design. So the pathways is pavement, it's concrete, and asphalt is actually the most accessible pathway. So it allows wheelchairs and mobility devices to use it without it being uneven. And on the grounds of the garden, you can see that space was left in between the plots in each rows to allow anybody with a device or wheelchair to come through. Also, our entrances, our service gate is located right by the parking lot or right by the designated parking spaces that the garden members use. So if anyone, and we also have an additional passenger gate on the other side. So people don't need to walk all the way to one side if they have a wheelchair or a scooter, they can enter through a large passenger gate, a large service gate at the beginning of the parking lot where they're designated to park. And then we also have the passenger gate on the other side. So if they're coming from the opposite direction, it allows them to enter from that side because the space is quite large. On the other side of this, there is a huge amount of space where we're going to build more boxes. So it's nice to have both entrances so you're not walking from one side to the other. Parking is also available to members, so we kept that in mind to make sure that if there is anybody driving or bringing in tools or supplies, they have that designated area by the service gate and they don't have to worry about parking on the street or parking far and walking there. And as you can see, the plots, as I mentioned, all 64 of the garden plots are raised off of the ground, and the ones near the service gate on the opposite side of this photo are what we call our most accessible garden plots, as they're the closest to the entrance. So that's and these were taken about a few weeks ago. So this is just after a month that the garden has started. So you can see that everyone's growing and putting installations in and having and enjoying it. And every time that we have visited, or myself or Erin have visited, well, there's garden members there that are really enjoying the plots, and the pavement apparently is doing a lot for the heat and is growing a lot. So we're happy to hear that. Okay, so next up, we're going to go to some of the challenges. So some of the challenges that we faced to make it accessible, there were 3 big areas, and that was materials, time, and cost. So when building this garden, we actually had a very, very small time frame to complete it. We were only given a month, and within that month, we had to coordinate everything, all the materials, all of the deliveries, find all the supplies for the garden, sign garden members, prepare for the build, and that gave us limited time to look at different materials and source alternative materials that are more accessible. So with that being said, that also relates to cost. So the cost of some of the materials were more expensive, and the budget that we had was not very large and allowed us to purchase some of these more expensive materials. And these are all similar or common challenges that most people have or that they face when building a garden or trying to transition a garden into making it more accessible. So for us, we wanted to build the garden and have that ground to be laid. And now as it's built, as time goes on, we can make those changes slowly for the accessibility. So you can see here the irrigation taps are the taps you have to turn. And so for people that are not able to turn it, that can be difficult to turn the water on. And we've had some complaints about it being hard to screw the hoses in because it's quite close to the tap, so you scrape your hand on it. So we needed an irrigation system in, and we had to do it quickly so people could start to use the garden. But now, as the garden is built and time goes on, we can look at replacing these taps to make them more accessible and easier, and have a lever that turns on so you don't have to put as much force to turn these on, and to make the hoses easier as well. And so other thing that we had was manpower. So having a hand in the garden, again, whether you're upgrading or building them, it does take a lot of time, and it takes usually a few people to do that. So that can be difficult sometimes to coordinate and organize those things, and it takes longer than expected. And another challenge that we had is with all projects, the ability to be flexible and adapt to ever-changing decisions and barriers can make it difficult to maintain accessibility. So, for example, the gate that got put in was not exactly what we had imagined, and the locks that were placed were not they're not easy to use, and they were difficult to open. And we did have some complaints about, or some struggles with that, from garden members that were frustrated because they couldn't get in properly. The locks weren't turning. So in that time frame of making sure we had a gate and a lock, we had realized that this was not a good choice. And so now we have the time to go out and source a better way to secure the garden, whether that be a code lock or keys for the garden members, but we now have the time to look at that. And the last thing that we have here that I don't have listed in accessibility, but just a challenge that we had for the garden, is the inclusivity of the garden and the members. So the demographics of the garden are not diverse among members and the coordinators, and that's more so in relation to age and ethnic background. And we want to make sure moving forward, as we continue to build gardens, that that the members and the coordinators are reflective of the neighborhood and the area in which they live. So that is something that we are currently working on and brainstorming ways to make the gardens more inclusive and diverse among members and coordinators, and have that reflect the area that they live. And as I mentioned, that was something that was highlighted in the audit, was that garden members or coordinators are predominantly white middle-aged women that are retired. So we want to make sure that we're having coordinators that are also, or having the opportunity for people to be coordinators and garden members that are reflective of and diverse. So that was some of the challenges we had, and that, I know I'm finished quite early, is the end of the presentation. So I have both my contact information and Erin's contact information if you ever wanted to reach out or ask us about our gardens or experiences. And you can also ask me any questions if you have them now.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm in Richmond, so we're kind of dealing with a few different community garden issues out here. More recently, I'm a volunteer with the Richmond Center for Disability, and we're, I guess, working on the Garden City lands where there's a new community garden. I guess the first question is, as a middle-aged white woman who's retired, I'm not sure that I should still be part of this conversation, but in any case, where do you kind of see this sort of reaching sort of the broader community? Because when you take a look at intersectionality, I think you could say people with disabilities might include middle-class white women, but you know, again, I'm just trying to kind of figure out where you're coming from on that one. So I'll let you just kind of.
Yeah. So I don't think I articulated that part well. So it's not meant as that we never want garden coordinators to be that demographic, or we're being like, no, we need different people, different garden coordinators. It's one of our things that we're trying to work for and do is create networks and training across all community garden coordinators in BC, and Erin is currently, that's something that we're working on. So people from different municipalities can talk, but that also in that is to provide training in both conflict resolution and just practices that are both inclusive and equitable. And we find that when we were in Surrey, previous garden coordinators in some of the gardens didn't have that. And it's not to say that that was of anyone's fault, just going in and be like, as a garden coordinator, nobody was ever given that. And as conflicts came up and different cultural practices in gardening came up, we found that people weren't aware of that. And that's not to anyone's fault, but that often caused conflict and tension within the garden. So I think it's more so about training and having those resources available to garden coordinators no matter what. So that they're
cultural issues, like, could you help understand what that is? Like, what specifically do you mean cultural practices?
Yeah, so I think Aaron knows a little bit more about this, but
Pat, why don't I jump in?
Yeah,
Sure.
Hey, Pat. So I think when we're talking about gardens, a lot of the time, we really want to make sure gardens are reflective of the demographics within the garden are reflective of the neighborhood they're within. We know when we're working with gardens, seniors tend to have so much more time, and that's like such a wonderful thing when we're talking about coordinating and all the different things. And one of the things that we're finding is young families are having a lot of trouble getting into the gardens and growing. And so we're trying to find ways of making sure that those families are able to have space, have time to grow food. And so maybe it's thinking of gardens in a different way even. We were just in a workshop yesterday, and one of the ideas that came up, which I think is really neat, is what would happen if we hired some students over the summer, and so they were able to work with families and say, all right, so you're not able to tend your bed 3 times a week, especially in the height of the growing season. What would happen if a student came and helped kind of tend the bed, and you were able to come maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, and then still get the food from that growing? So really trying to think outside of the box of the ways that we're designing the gardens so that we can get demographics that are reflective of the neighborhood, just as one example.
Yeah, I think certainly in Richmond, there's a really long wait list
Yeah.
to get into the community garden. And, oddly, in the community garden that I'm in personally, some people get a garden and then they don't do anything with it. They don't tend it, the food goes to waste. And probably the biggest problem is theft. There's a lot of things that are stolen from community gardens, and people get frustrated and give up because they, heartbreaking, you're tending your patch of strawberries or your peppers, and then you come one day and it's all gone, literally all gone. So, for me, it's more of a social experience, and I enjoy that part of it. But, there's signs up, there's people putting fences, there's locks on the fences that go around, and still, like, people find that stuff is still going missing. So yeah, it's discouraging. But the wait list issue, I'm circling back to the cultural part because I'm interested to hear what you have to say about that. But those are certainly some of the challenges that we're finding here.
Yeah, and I know there's a school farm East Side Vancouver, and what they found is like people were stealing food, and it was because it wasn't because people were trying to be malicious or anything. But a lot of the families in the neighborhood were immigrants, and back in their home country, if food was grown, that was for everyone to share. It wasn't, this is my private plot and I'm growing food and therefore you're not allowed to take that. And so what they found is that they put up signs, they were putting up signs in different languages. And so so what would happen is they actually saw the reduction of theft because people come by and go, oh, this is for the school. I understand that I shouldn't be, but it was more accessible in that way.
Yeah, that could be that it's a misunderstanding, but I've literally seen people come with bags and go around and pick people's food, and you tell them to stop and they just ignore you. So, you don't want to get into any confrontation with people, but it does seem as though people sometimes kind of take advantage of the situation and act maybe like they don't understand, or they see that they're not being prevented, so that if they can, they just do, and that is pretty discouraging for people that
I get that
to do the gardening.
And also, a bigger question around food security, maybe some of these people really need it. And so how do we make sure that we're creating more spaces for people to grow food? So those folks that are coming and, potentially taking from someone else's plot, maybe coming to them and say, hey, look, we're actually able to create more garden spaces and therefore give you space to grow food if you're having trouble purchasing food yourself, with the rise of inflation.
Yeah, it's hard to say. We have a sharing farm in West Richmond at the Terranova lands, and the food bank is very active in in gleaning and in gathering food that is surplus, both from restaurants and from farmers and things like that. So I'm not sure. The accessibility piece, again, going back to kind of looking at this as sort of an issue to do with people with disabilities potentially. It is hard, I guess, to look at gardens that already exist, because I've tried to make a case in our garden when space came available to create accessible space. And it's often just perceived as something that isn't necessary and creates another layer of complexity, I guess. So in our garden, there is no accessible gardening space. And what is available at the Garden City lands is similar to the containers that you have in the second garden, I think, that we saw.
Great.
So, you know, it's, yeah, you know, the surface is not concrete. So I'm not sure how it's going to work for people in wheelchairs, but, you know, it's good that they're making a start, but to have it sort of concentrated in only one garden, I think is unfortunate, because there are people in each neighborhood that would benefit from accessibility. And to just kind of tick the box and say, oh, but we're doing it in this one place, so that means that we're an accessible municipality, doesn't really make sense to me. You know, it feels like it's a missed opportunity.
Yeah, and why I'm really excited about the accessibility toolkit, it was created in partnership with the City of Victoria. And so it came out because they just passed a motion around, sorry, it was a little while ago since I heard the motion, but it was pretty much looking at accessibility from all lenses of the city. And so they actually hired an accessibility coordinator as part of their staff, and they were doing different audits of their different programs. And one of the things they found is, hey, community gardens is a place that's so embedded in that community. And so two things ended up happening with this toolkit. So three things actually. So one is we did some workshops with garden coordinators to give them support on how to create more accessible community gardens. And that one was more looking less about the physical accessibility, but really pulling at the heartstrings of figuring out, like, how are you looking at the way you connect with people and trying to bring in more people and really trying to look at those different things. The second piece was actually getting the garden coordinators themselves to do audits of their own garden, looking at it from a physical accessibility standpoint. And so on the back of that toolkit is the audit that the city did. And it may be worthwhile looking at the different gardens in Richmond and saying, hey, are there things that we could do and maybe ask the city for that we all don't have, right? Like just making sure that the shed handles are working right. Or, you know what I mean? Like those different types of things. And then this toolkit came as the last one. And so I have seen cities, you know, take a role and they put out a grant to help support people with upgrades in their garden. We know that not every garden, it's not as easy as just waving a wand and it being completely accessible. You know, we're dealing with mulch, we're dealing with things that just are challenging to be accessible. And so I think it's, you know, slowly pushing your city, getting some grants, trying to support all gardens, kind of moving in a direction of being slowly more accessible over time.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. I noticed that I'm actually on page 19 of your guide, that I'm in a photograph. I used to volunteer with the Disabled Independent Gardeners Association.
Oh, great. Yes, that was one of the organizations that we wanted to highlight. So wonderful.
Yeah. So I've been a vocational rehab consultant for many years, and I've worked with people with spinal cord injury as part of special care services at WorkSafe BC. Mm-hmm. So one of my clients was interested in gardening. So she didn't wind up staying with it. She thought of it more of as an opportunity to kind of beautify her backyard and not necessarily actively engage. And I think that's where when you actually are working with clients with disabilities, it's really important that the focus is on them and their capacity to engage independently rather than doing for them and then them just coming along and watching, which is easy sometimes to happen because it takes longer for them to do things. And they can sometimes get frustrated with just how long it takes to get something done. So one thing I think that was really popular, that's at the Pandora Garden where that photograph was actually taken, was that we would have kind of like snacks or lunch or something like that was using something from the garden. And those moments of conversation and interaction were actually the best part of the whole experience. Because often like there isn't a lot to be done necessarily, but if you can chop up some chives, put it in cream cheese, spread it on a cracker, and then have a conversation around what you're seeing, all the sensory experiences around you, the colors, what's changed from the last time. That's really value added, I think, that level of interaction. So I had to change my expectations about what I was there to do. And it wasn't really there to work. It was more there to interact and draw attention and help people sort of experience things in a more sensory sort of way. And yeah, for my 2 cents worth, that was, and I made some good friends that I still have today. So
Love it. And isn't it, it's not just people with disabilities that can benefit from that, right? It's all of us.
Yeah.
These spaces are meant to make everyone, feel calm and relaxed, and whether or not you have a garden bed, being able to go in there and just take a moment and look at the bees or the pollinators flying around.
absolutely. And,
Yeah.
and I think one of the things that are sometimes missed in planning is to actually designate a space, like even if it's just a picnic table or somewhere where people can gather, that all of the beds are sort of put together and there's no communal space. The Terra Nova Gardens are very good that way because they have a place where you can have group meals. They have a long table there that's awesome. I've had really great events there where everybody is sort of elbow to elbow and kind of sharing, right? And you're not just like, if you can kind of detach yourself from going there to work and saying, we're going there to engage with each other, meet people, have conversations, and having the space that facilitates that, right?
I think that's the true essence behind community gardens, isn't it? Is that we just come together as a community. And
I think most people that are planning it think that the purpose is to grow things. And I think that's number 3 or 4 on the list, actually, from my experience. So you're growing kind of relationships and interaction. So whatever you can do to facilitate that, I think the plants will grow on their own. And even when things don't grow, that sort of triggers conversation as well. You have discussions around the bugs and why the tomatoes aren't growing and why everybody has blight, and it's an ongoing kind of thing, right? But yeah.
Thanks for sharing. That's really great.
So are you in touch at all with people in Richmond? Have you had any interaction?
Yeah, so we've connected a lot with Urban Bounty.
Okay.
So that's the organization that we're connected with.
Yeah.
We did a presentation with them in the City of Surrey at a conference.
It's great. So how about the City of Richmond or the Richmond Disability? Is there any?
We connect a little bit with the city. Mostly Urban Bounty has that relationship with the city. And so they know that we've done this accessibility toolkit. So maybe something you want to share again as well.
Okay. Yeah, I've just started to volunteer with them, so I don't really know what's going on yet, but I can share the toolkit with them if they don't already have it, and let them know that you guys are available as a resource. So
perfect. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Great.
All right. Well, I guess that's it for the questions. Oh, Angie, you're muted. Do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to unmute myself and it wouldn't pop up here. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, Pat, for your question, and sharing your experiences too in the garden, which is really great. And yeah, I just want to thank everyone for coming and attending. And I know it was a little bit of a fast presentation and a little bit quicker than an hour, but I still appreciate that you guys are coming out. And I just want to thank Degatu for giving us this opportunity to showcase all of us. So thank you. And I'm not sure if they have anything to say or if that's just kind of it.
Well, thank you for your presentation. It was lovely. And thank you everyone for attending. That's everything. Then I can end the meeting now. Thank you again. I hope all of you take care.